place. On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. What for? Not the fruit. The tree that bears the fruit is not the one that was planted. I want the tree that stands in the earth for the first time, with the sun already going down and the water touching its roots in the earth full of the dead, and the clouds passing one by one over its leaves.
William's true life that he truly loves is writing poetry in the morning, and that involves reading and thinking and drinking tea and looking out at the palms. And then in the afternoon, potting and planting trees.
W.S.Merwin was born in New York City in 1927. The son of a Presbyterian minister, he spent his childhood in Union City, New Jersey, and Scranton, Pennsylvania. At an early age, Merwin demonstrated a passion for poetry and for the natural world around him.
I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I remember when I first began to write poems. I was trying to write hymns, to be sung in church, and I illustrated them, and they were very weird-looking little things, like words misspelled. And when I did it, I realized that I was in touch with the language that I'd heard from the King James Version, and in some of the hymns, the language which is not just like ordinary speech, but had a different quality and different life in it. I didn't know what it was, but the moment I tried to write these little verses, I realized there's a very distant connection with that, and that's what I wanted to do, was write poems. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do it, and I really wanted to make that the middle of my life. And people kept saying, "How are you going to earn a living?" And I said, "Well, I'll find that out as I go." I was an urban kid. I grew up right across the river from New York, in Union City, West Hoboken. My father's church was right on the edge of the cliff, and if I looked out of the back window, I could look and see the whole of the Hoboken Harbor, which is gone now, and all the river traffic, most of which isn't there now. I think the first time that I remember being utterly angry was when a bunch of nice guys came with saws to climb up on that poplar tree and start cutting, trimming limbs for their telephone wires or something like that. And I just screamed and shot out of the house and up the steps and over and started beating these guys with my fists and saying, "You let that tree alone," And nobody knew how, this was a little volcano that nobody expected. And they had to go away.
At the age of 16, Merwin enrolled at Princeton University, where he studied with the likes of R.P. Blackmer and John Berryman. Upon graduation, and heeding the advice of Ezra Pound, he traveled to Europe to continue his studies of Romance languages and focus on translation work. These travels would lead to a lifelong connection to Europe, in particular the French countryside of the Dordogne Valley, where he lived on and off for many years.
Pound said to me, and I think it was absolutely true, he said, a poet, in order to be a poet, he loved being a sort of school teacher. He said a poet has to take himself seriously as a poet, or herself seriously as a poet, which means try to work at it every day. And he said, you should try to write 75 lines a day. He said, you haven't got anything to write 75 lines about. You think you do, but you don't. And so the thing to do is to get languages and translate, because the work of translation is the best teacher you'll ever have.
He's different from most people. Sometimes it's bothered some people that he never taught. Even though he didn't have any money, he never wanted to be a part of an establishment. He would do whatever he needed to do, cut his own hair, wear the same clothes, whatever it was, just in order to maintain his independence. Some people have taken it as arrogance at different times. But the truth is, people are struck by his depth and his authenticity.
In the beginning, there was something secret about this part of the world. If you talk to French people in the early 60s, nobody came here. Nobody got off the train down. It was always on the way to Toulouse or somewhere else. And it was the connection with an older culture that I guess I hungered for. I mean, I really wanted to find that link coming all the way through. And I think this is not uncommon among American writers at all, I think. I mean, you look through Moby Dick and you look through Faulkner, certainly. Again and again you find them trying to make that link again. It sounds very remote from growing up near New York, and in a way it was. And then sometimes I would say to myself, how serious are you about this? And I thought, very serious. I want to know this thing about these links, you know, that we've lost, that we paid no attention to, and how people live that close to the seasons and to the weather and to the living things all around them. Knowing the place, you know, that's what I felt here. Poetry begins with hearing, begins with hearing the sounds of passion. I think language began with the urge to articulate something that could not be said. Great grief or great passion, or great erotic passion or great anger. You couldn't put it into you didn't know how to do it. I mean, shrieking and howling and things weren't enough. You wanted to make it more intimate and clear than that. And I think that's how language, and that's how poetry began. Poetry is about not information, it's about expressing something inexpressible. It's there in the poetry, it's there all the way through Shakespeare. You know, that thing where he's so furious at his mother, and he said, and would it were not so, you were my mother. Think of the complexity of that line. And it's right there in the sound. And would it were not so, you were my mother. Yeah. It just does you in the gut to hear a line like that. The bitterness and the hatred and the anger, with all the other feelings too, you know. That's in the sound. That's not in the information. I think that we're so made that if language begins to fade, look. No, he just went right over at the top of the telephone pole is a black kite. He'll be back. He comes every evening, and he sails around this part. He goes right out over the valley. I think it must be exciting all of a sudden to be that high, you know.
With the publication of The Lice in 1967 and The Carrier of Ladders in 1970, which won him the first of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, Merwin gave voice to his disillusionment with the state of humanity and its destructiveness. He famously donated the Pulitzer Award money to the Vietnam anti-war movement. By the late 1970s, he had moved to Hawaii to study Zen Buddhism and begin his decades-long restoration of forests on the north shore of Maui.
The Cuban Missile Crisis hit, and I heard people in the street saying, we should have bombed them years ago. And I thought, Jesus, these are people who don't love their lives at all. They don't care about their own lives, but they're prepared to take somebody else's. And I woke up down in the village there thinking, I'm angry all the time. I'm angry at what's going on. I'm angry at the way people are talking about it. I'm angry. This isn't good. There's something the matter. I better get out of here. And I said, I better learn how to grow my lettuces and my beans and my potatoes. Anger is one of the, I think, most dangerous feelings to deal with in poetry. It can very easily turn a poem into pop propaganda because you think you're right about something and everybody else is wrong. Anger draws one away, it makes one lose perspective, and the imagination is not heard. The imagination is far more complicated than right and wrong. I'm not saying that anger is no part of poetry. Blake and Dante were both great, supremely great poets who were fueled all their lives by anger. They weren't used by their anger, they used the anger. That's the huge difference. But this is an anger that I had with me in my life since I was about 5 years old and heard the story. And it didn't occur to me that it could ever be a poem. It's a poem called The Chain to Her Leg. If we forget Topsy, Topsy remembers. When we forget her mother gunned down in the forest and forget who killed her and to whom they sold the tusks, the feet, the good parts, and how they died and where and what became of their children and what happened to the forest, Topsy remembers. When we forget how the wires were fastened on her feet for the experiment the first time, and how she smoldered and shuddered there with them all watching but did not die. When we forget the lit cigarette, the last laugh gave her lit end first, as though it were a peanut, the joke for which she killed him, we will not see home again. When we forget the circus, the tickets to see her die in the name of progress at Edison and the electric chair, the mushroom cloud will go up over the desert. The Enola Gay will take off after the chaplain's blessing. The smoke from the Black Mesa's power plants will be visible from the moon. The forests will be gone. The extinctions will accelerate. The polar bears will float farther and farther away, and off the edge of the world, the Topsy remembers. I remember arguing with Robert Bly at the time of the Vietnam War, and I said, Robert, I'm not going to get up on a soapbox and start beating out the same things about how evil the war is and everything. I mean, I'll go around and do readings and say that I'm opposed to it and leave it at that. But I don't want to be, here's Merwin, we know what he's going to say, you know. And you made yourself predictable. They don't just what you're going to say, they just write it off and don't listen and get on with what they're doing. If somebody knocks on the door and asks me these questions, I want to have the answer right ready. But I'm not going to go beating them over the head with it because they may not be ready to listen to it. The tradition that we're handed in the book of Genesis says humans are instructed to go out and increase and multiply and have dominion over all the other forms of life. And the result is we're destroying species. 35 years ago, a biologist told me we're losing a species a week, and I was shocked. Now we're losing a species every few seconds. And we can't put any of that back. This is irreversible.
We initially wanted to grow native plants, and we quickly realized that you couldn't do it. The habitat is destroyed, the native birds are gone, they've all been driven out and cut down. So we grew what we could, the native Hawaiian Prochardias. We've got most of, we're still missing 5 or 6. And then I realized that he was trying to see what would grow, what they did together.
The first thing to do is to put the canopy back. And the moment you get the canopy back and can get anything to grow, any trees to grow, the trees begin to make forest conditions. And that was my idea, was to have forest conditions here. You know, you can't plant a forest because a forest is an ecosystem that no human being understands, the biology, the complicated biology of microorganisms and mycorrhizas and insects and everything that come to make up a forest. It evolves. Those 3 trees back in the dark there that you can hardly see, that's a species that it's said that this garden saved it from extinction. It was supposedly extinct, technically extinct. So it only exists now in cultivation with people like, you know, nuts like me that are trying to grow it. And some of the nuts are amateurs too, you know. If you leave it to the pros, they're better at it than we are, but there are fewer of them. And so, you know, things are going to get lost. It's got to have a little freedom of attitude about that too.
I was in the White House in Obama's office with him. I was watching him and my mother in the office. We were all there together. And the intensity and the focus with which, I mean, Obama said, first thing he said, well, tell me what you want to do as poet laureate. And I could tell he admired William a lot, but I still don't think he was particularly prepared for when you ask William, tell me what you want to do. I mean, he wanted to talk about landscape and the imagination.
Really, the thing that makes us so remarkable as a species is not our technology and not how smart we are, not any of those things. I think it's the imagination. We don't know where it comes from, but it's the ability to care about the whales in the Pacific that are dying from pollution and from malnutrition, and the homeless people on the street, and the people starving to death and mistreated in Darfur in Africa. What are they to do with us? Everything or nothing. And it's the imagination that says they're everything to do with us. If it happens to them, it happens to us too. I think that's it, and I think that's the source of the arts, and it's the source of the real value in humanity. That's why it matters whether we survive or not. You know, Thoreau, who's to me our great American prophet, he said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." What does wildness mean? He's not just talking about rushing around with your clothes off and behaving like a fool. The wild is the sense of something that's just got away from you, something that you can't ever really hold on to, that's there, that's terribly important to you, and you can't grasp it. That's the wild. That's what I'm calling the unknown. When you look up at the night sky, isn't it amazing that we're here at all? We've got this life, we've got these moments, we can look up at the sky, we can see the whole thing. The likeliness of it doesn't exist, it's so small, it's so unlikely. And that's the wildness. That's the wildness that we're part of. If we lose respect for that, well, then we get self-important, and that's part of our problem, you know. This is the most self-important species on the earth.
You know, the listening, a word that still recurs in his poetry, if anything, more now. Listening, waiting, mystery, not knowing, or even unknowing. And he seems not just comfortable with not knowing things, but it seems to be a state that he encourages. Now, it's interesting because the other side of this is, if you've ever watched William tackle a subject, botany, horticulture, I mean, all the palms in his gardens, or languages when he's translating, you'll see a rapacious mind go after, you know, a series of encyclopedias and books, and he will just absorb the knowledge.
You know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm finding out every day what I'm doing. I think we kid ourselves in the garden if we think we know too much. Rain light. All day the stars watch from long ago. My mother said, I'm going now. When you are alone, you will be all right. Whether or not you know, you will know. Look at the old house in the dawn rain. All the flowers are forms of water. The sun reminds them through a white cloud, touches the patchwork spread on the hill, the washed colors of the afterlife that lived there long before you were born. See how they wake without a question, even though the whole world is burning.